Are you living paycheck to paycheck and constantly worried about making ends meet? Well, you're not alone. A study by RSA in 2018 suggests that 70% of UK workers are clinically broke and are less likely to have substantial amounts of savings. But what happens when you're faced with a large or unforeseen expense? How can you afford to pay that? In this first episode of the series called Back to Basics, we'll be talking about how you can stop living paycheck to paycheck by building an emergency fund. Okay, so life is tough. In times like these, it's not wise to have nothing saved up. What if you have an unforeseen expense? Your washing machine could break, you could have a leaky roof, or you could drop your phone down the toilet. For most, the easy way out would be getting a payday loan. A payday loan is a short-term but high-interest loan that typically gets paid off when you get your next set of wages. But this isn't sustainable in the long term. You're effectively pushing the problem for you to deal with in the future. And that's not even the worst of it. The UK is in a recession for the first time in 11 years. Companies are struggling to stay afloat. They can either cut down costs or they close down. And what does that mean for you? You could be made redundant. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, how can you pay for costs when you're unemployed? Okay, so let's try and move away from all this doom and gloom. You know it's an issue, so what can you do about it? This is where an emergency fund comes in. This is a pot of savings that you can tap into whenever you have an unforeseen or unexpected cost. This pot isn't something that you lump together with your regular savings. Try and keep it somewhere separate, but also accessible. Remember, an emergency fund isn't something that you use to pay for your shopping spree or a cheeky holiday. This is solely for emergencies. So you may be asking, how the hell do I build an emergency fund if I'm living paycheck to paycheck? Well, the unfortunate answer is that you have to pull it from your wages. You'll need to scrimp as much as possible from your wages to build up this fund. It'll be tough, I admit it, but it'll be worth it. A suggestion is using a standing order to automatically move a proportion of your wages into a savings account. That way you never see the money go and you can manage your budget according to whatever's left in your account. This concept is called paying yourself first. It's something we'll explore in a future video. Start off small, aim to move around 4% of your take-home monthly pay into your emergency fund, and maybe work your way up if you feel comfortable moving more. The aim is to build up this fund as quick and sustainably as possible. But how much should your emergency fund contain? That's a good question. I'm glad you're paying attention. Most financial advisors suggest that your emergency fund should contain 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. However, it's up to you how big you make your emergency fund. If you've got a fairly stable job, maybe you only need 3 months worth of living expenses. If you're self-employed, if you're a consultant, if your job involves you needing to find customers, maybe you need 6 months worth of expenses saved up to then give you that additional stability. A bigger pot also comes in handy when you've been made redundant, as it gives you a bit of a buffer between unemployment and finding a new job. So where should you put your emergency fund? Like I said before, ideally you want it somewhere that's easy access. You don't want it locked up, especially in an emergency. Find an easy access bank account that pays the highest interest and put your emergency fund in there. Note, the point of an emergency fund isn't to build up interest, so don't constantly move your money around chasing that additional 0.01%. It's just not worth it. Just make sure you're not getting ripped off, and that's it. If you follow these steps, you'll have a pot to dip into when you have an emergency. It's important to remember that once you've gotten back on your feet, you need to fill up your emergency fund back to its original level as fast as possible. There's no use of pulling it out constantly until there's nothing left. You either want to make sure that the pot is full or is being filled. My final point is to reassess your emergency fund regularly. Ask yourself, has your emergency fund been able to cover your emergencies in the last few months? If it's been more than enough, leave that as is. If it hasn't been enough, maybe you need to reassess the amount you have in there. Life happens, situations change, especially as you get older. Make sure your emergency fund still works for you. Okay, I hope that's been helpful. If you have any more questions, leave them down in the comments. I'll try and help as much as I can. Or just Google around. I'm sure there's a lot of information about building an emergency fund. Like if you found this video helpful, subscribe if you want to see more like this every week. Otherwise, I've been Jane, here to make sure that your money matters. See you next week.